A very cordial hello to you all. I'm Christoph Kiefer. I work at the University of Geisenheim. Professor Solnocki and myself, over the last 5 years, looked at the market acceptance or adoption of PIWI varieties. And we used the typical market survey tools to find out more about acceptance and about how the market took it up of the producers, the dealers, and in particular, of course, also of the consumers with regards to PIWI varieties. We began with production. Then we talked to the different businesses. Now, these would be wine growers, cooperatives, estates, just to sample the moods out there. And we published the results in international journals. And we're pleased to say that a conference in Montpellier also mentioned this. They recognized our efforts. It's not just Germany, after all, that shows interest in PIWIs, but also Italy and France are taking this up. So, what is the outcome of this survey? Now, you have to look at the bigger picture, of course. Now, the survey is a couple of years old. It was actually conducted in the years 2020, 2021. But if we look at the multipliers, we heard about this from Olympia Samara, that many of the challenges she outlined were still challenges in 2022. Now you can see a lot of skepticism about. Now we looked at how demand had developed and how wine growers viewed the development of demand. And you can see a lot of them had their doubts. Of course, there was an increase in demand, something that we saw over the last 5 years, but it's all still happening on a fairly moderate level. About half of respondents said, well, already now, PIWIs are competitive. However, there's room for improvement. So what are the challenges when it comes to marketing? Now, a lot of people were quite happy, actually, with the first stages of winemaking, maturing, aging, and also with regards to enological factors. In spite of a lot of skepticism out there, people accepted it quite well. So when we look at production, first of all, we have all the usual factors. The variety, the names of the varieties are not very attractive. The varieties are little known to consumers. Now, the whole PIWI thing is too technical for people's liking. And people also said wine stylistics was not done justice to properly. And then we also looked at retail and trade, or the commercial aspect, so selling PIWIs. People often cited a comparison. They said, well, given the time and the effort I have to put in to sell a box of Riesling wine, I could sell 1 bottle of PIWI wine. So lots of effort needed to be put in to sell the PIWI wine. So, the dealers, what did they point out? What should be done? And as we already heard today, they said we need to have more active advertising in order to really create an awareness on the side of consumers for them to hear about the PIWI wines. Now, of course, we also received a lot of praise because we are able to offer and show so many advantages in terms of the environment, sustainability, and so on. Especially these days where people are generally more aware about these issues and where the costs of viticulture are going up, fungal resistance is a very important USP. Then the exchange of knowledge or know-how transfer, and that is why we're here today, is also very important. And that is why so many people here are connected today online, because we don't really want to start from scratch. We want to learn from others, from their failures or also from their successes. And what we also heard is that PIWI varieties don't have to be always pure varieties. There are other categories as well that could sell cuvées or sparkling wines, brand wines, or other types of wines. Now, if we focus on what is most important, the consumer, we conducted a group interview. We wanted to find out about the mood on the side of the user, the consumer, and then we quantified the response we got. Both papers were studied in international journals. Now, generally speaking, there are two factors that emerge. Now, we heard price is important, always important. Now, when it comes to buying, it's also, of course, the origin that counts, flavor or taste, very important, and the variety, of course, and how well known it is. Because the better it is known, people will know what flavor to expect, and hence it minimizes the risk of the purchase. Now, what we wanted to know initially was we have different varieties and different designations, and we asked people about them. We wanted to know how well known they were. So in the case of the PIWIs, we found that they were little known, generally speaking. And when it came to the quality perception, that people took very different views on that. Now, an exception is the Dornfelder, perhaps, but that perhaps can serve as a pretty good indicator for the quality of data. We also wanted to know about more general things. Now, we know that the different varieties were little known, but what about PIWI wines in general? How well known are they? Now, 14% said, yes, we have heard of PIWI wines, but a large amount, 2/3, said never heard of them. And about 20% were unsure. Now, if you convert that and apply this to 45 million wine drinkers, you get 6 million people, that's German users of wine, who've heard about PIWI before. So that is a large number. And because this was a representative survey, I think this data can be called robust. Then we also wanted to hear more about the consumers. We showed them different information about PIWIs, and we wanted to know their view on this, whether they would be interested or skeptical. And we realized that acceptance levels were generally very high. It was above average, whereas doubts were below average. And we also verified this by conducting a sensory study that you'll hear more about this later on, and the same result emerged. And also when it came to the purchasing probability, we saw that acceptance levels were pretty high. As soon as consumers knew more about PIWIs, and there is a clear correlation between above average interest and an above average willingness to buy. This again we verified using the studio test, and we saw the same outcome. Now, when it comes to market research and marketing of PIWIs, you have to look at different target groups. So we wanted to find out which target groups would be more open-minded towards PIWI wines and who less so. In the left, you can see the difficult-to-persuade groups, talking about PIWIs still, of course, and on the right, 2 or 3 groups who are more easily brought around. Now, the traditionalists are on the left. So your typical wine drinker, slightly older, they drink above average wine, well, amounts of wine. They have average knowledge about wine. Most of them drink red wines from abroad, and normally they buy well-known varieties. Another group are experts. Now, this group have a pronounced interest. Normally, they have some initial experience with PIWI varieties, but with negative results, an impression that stuck with them. And now the challenge is to overcome that skepticism first in order to win them over for PIWI, but that will be quite difficult. On the other hand, there are women. Now, these are sort of open-minded women who like to drink when they meet other people. And then there's the low highs, so a lifestyle of health and sustainability group. Now, these are easily convinced of PIWIs. And in the middle, you can see the younger group who are taking up wine more and more and who are very interested in wine as such. And what you can see on the next slide are different facts relating to production, differences to conventional winemaking or conventional wines, and what goals are pursued with PIWIs. And we identified 3 routes. Now, these are results from qualitative research, so from the group discussions, and we can see there are 3 directions we can move in. Now, in the left, you can see the younger ones who tend to be slightly more skeptical because they only have limited knowledge and limited information about these wines. Now, some people suspected genetical engineering played a role, for example, or, a fear of displacement. And we realized the more we talked to this group, that we were able to overcome their skepticism. In the middle, you could see the very interested groups, women and LOHAS. For them, the health aspect is more important. Now, they want clear labeling because there are so many different types of wine. And if so many different varieties are subsumed under one name, that's more difficult or confusing. But there's also the economic advantage. So they would actually pay more per bottle. So they would pay more. And so then there are the traditionalists and so on. They were pretty indifferent. Their focus was on taste. Then we dug a little bit deeper, trying to dig ourselves into the brains of the users, as it were. So we conducted a neuro study. We had some respondents placed in an MRT, producing a blueprint of their brain, and took them through an exercise. So we showed them different PIWI varieties, non-PIWI varieties as well. Then, first we did this blind, so by not giving them any information, then by providing some information, as during the first study, and then we contrasted PIWI varieties with conventional ones. So, what was found out? Response to receiving information. Well, on the positive side, if people knew a variety, they associated more positive memories. On the other hand, if a variety was lesser known, the behavior was more neophobic. That is, a behavior that triggered was actually that registered as negative in the brain region. So in sum total, we had 240 people in a lab set up. And we asked them to taste conventional as well as PIWI wines, and this was published. First, there was a blind study following a specific scheme. Then conditioned, that is, they received information beforehand, and they also were told what variety they were actually tasting. And the 2 chief results or outcomes were this. Well, firstly, we wanted to know how the general impression would develop on a scale from 0 to 9. And in the left, you can see the PIWIs. On the right, the assessment of the conventional variety. So we had 4 PIWI wines and 4 conventional ones. And you can see the result of a blind tasting. That's the green box. So the impression or as to quality was comparable, but following the conditioning process, we can see that this led to a significant improvement, actually, of the impression. That's regarding taste. Now, we conducted this study because producer studies often told us that a lot of wine growers or producers sell PIWI varieties, but they don't really like to talk about them or what makes them good, because they are afraid that their chief wines will actually suffer from this, because the consumer will say, why should I continue to drink conventional wines that I know if PIWIs are also available? So we looked at the taste and at the price. But we can now contradict this conclusion, because both achieved a positive effect after they were told more about the wines, in both cases, PIWI and conventional wines. Finally, we took all the results we collated and then put them into an experiment, 1,200 persons, sorted by age and sex. And that was published again. And it was mentioned at the international conference in Dijon. So we had one group of 600 people who knew about PIWIs, and another group, the other 600, who had no information about PIWI, who didn't know anything about PIWIs. We then confronted both groups with the same scenario, so buying wines for a nice evening with friends, and we tested different combinations of products. And the differences between these combinations was price because it's such an important purchasing argument, the label, the variety, two PIWIs, two conventionals, and on the question whether information was available or not, and whether technical information was available or emotional information. And the other question was, should we have a seal, a quality seal for the wine or not? Should we do a PIWI seal or not? Should we clearly show it's a PIWI wine or not? And we found that the price, and you can see in the left the 5 categories or 5 attributes we had. In green, you can see the conditioned group, and the gray bar shows those who were naive or ignorant. You can see how important the price was. So 50% of their purchasing decision was based on price. Then the variety, and only then information provided and the label. A quality seal didn't play a role, really, or hardly any. Now, once people received information about it, you can see how all of this shifts. Price weighs less, variety, information, and all these attributes which tell a consumer about whether it's a PIWI variety or not gain more weight as part of the purchasing decision. Now, if we take a closer look at price, and if we come back to a result from our quantitative study, we can see that PIWI wines are expected to come at a higher price compared to organic wines, and of course higher than conventional wines. Now, let's come back to our umbrella term, because we had a brief discussion on this. We also wanted to find out what people thought about an umbrella term and what should be chosen as an umbrella term. Now, most people said, yes, we need some kind of label to attach to these wines, because most consumers have average or below average knowledge about wine. And given the sheer number of different wines available, and PIWI wines available, and future wines that will be PIWI wines, need to be identified clearly, or identifiable clearly, so that people know on the shelf what kind of a wine it is, or that it is a PIWI wine. So we asked about different umbrella terms and names we could give to these wines in the different studies. And, well, we simply made a list of possible names or umbrella terms. So as we can see, the consumers could imagine that sustainable variety would work well. Now, experts said fungus, it should be called fungus-resistant variety because this is already quite well established as a term, so let's stick to it. Now, we believe you can talk about sustainable varieties, but the PIWI acronym is now already so well established that we might as well continue to use it. Key facts, take-home facts, as it were, from my presentation here. Once we've prepared consumers, if we raise the awareness for PIWI wines, the likelihood that they'll buy them will be much higher. But of course, depending on the different target groups. Now, with a view to the different purchasing attributes, we found that once we've prepared the consumer on PIWIs, then there are other attributes that we will need to highlight more. So the food retailer is where most of these easily addressed consumers do their shopping in. But it's very important that they can recognize PIWI wines as such. What will be important for the future is that we talk about PIWI varieties. We have to open up PIWIs to the broader population, and the best way this is done by events, whether it's tastings or wine festivals, or, for example, wine-food pairing events, such as have been organized by the association, for example. And with this, I'd just like to say that we will only achieve to penetrate the market successfully if we talk about PIWI varieties and if we focus more on some target groups. Thank you very much.